Hi, I'm Jono, and this is my third video about biblical criticism. So, going back over what we already know, criticism means looking at the Bible carefully, not necessarily disagreeing with it or denying it. We also know that there are lots of different types of criticism, but we can group them into categories to make things a bit more manageable. One useful way of categorizing them is into historical criticism and literary criticism. Historical criticism asks questions about the origins and development of the biblical texts. Literary criticism, on the other hand, asks how the texts themselves work and communicate meaning. Today we're going to look at literary criticism, and I'll admit straight away that this is the kind of criticism I personally appreciate the most, because my own studies involve the use of literary criticism. Literary criticism is a little different from historical criticism. Instead of asking how the documents came to be or how certain we can be that a particular passage originally belonged in the New Testament, literary criticism generally takes the text we have as the starting point. It begins with the assumption that, in broad terms, the text represents the form intended by its author or editor, and from there it asks questions about how the text creates meaning and what it's trying to communicate to its readers. There are hundreds of different approaches to literary criticism, but we'll look at a few of the more popular ones to give you an idea of the kinds of questions they ask. The first of these we'll look at is narrative criticism. Narrative criticism is all about the story. In narrative criticism, we think about things like setting, characters, timing, and all the usual things that matter when you are understanding a story an author is telling. But we also think about why the author is telling the story in the first place. Now, in the Bible, authors aren't usually writing just to entertain, so we think about what their aims are. Why are they telling this story? Why are they telling it in this particular way and using this particular approach? Next up is rhetorical criticism. Whereas narrative criticism is about stories, rhetorical criticism is about persuasion. It's most useful when you encounter something like a speech or a letter that is specifically aimed at making someone think or act differently. So, for example, the letters of Paul, or the speeches found in the Gospels and Acts. But it can also be useful when a text records conversations or actions that follow a conversation and show that someone has changed their mind or had a change of heart. Rhetorical criticism is actually quite ancient. It was a method that was already being taught around the time the New Testament was written, but it has seen something of a resurgence, particularly since the latter half of the 20th century. We also have reader response criticism. Whereas narrative criticism and rhetorical criticism focus mostly on the author's intention, reader response criticism focuses on how the reader reacts with what is written. This approach also connects with historical context. If we understand the ancient world well, we can get a sense of how an ancient reader might respond differently to a text than a modern reader would. At the same time, some aspects of reading are shared across time. There are ways in which people today still understand stories, emotions, and ideas in much the same way ancient readers did. Reader response criticism then tries to make sense of the thoughts and feelings that might arise in a reader when engaging with the Bible, or in the ancient world, when hearing it read aloud. Intertextual criticism is a specialist discipline that explores the way the text is shaped by or engages with other texts. New Testament writers frequently make use of Old Testament texts. Sometimes there are direct quotations where the Old Testament is cited word for word. Sometimes there are allusions, which is where ideas from the Old Testament are used without quoting the direct wording. For example, drawing of the story of Noah to help interpret events in their own time. And sometimes there are echoes, where language or style from the Old Testament is used in a way that prompts the reader to think of those earlier texts and their meaning. There are also occasions where text outside the Bible may be used in a similar way, and this approach is becoming increasingly important as scholars gain a wider access to the range of ancient literature. There are other forms of literary criticism that we won't look at today, such as canonical criticism, structural criticism, feminist criticism, liberationist criticism, post-colonial criticism, and many more besides. One important feature of literary criticism is that because it focuses on the existing texts, the different approaches can often be combined quite easily. For example, my own discipline is rhetorical narratology, which combines an understanding of persuasion with attention to narrative. This is especially useful in a book like Acts, where speeches are embedded within a larger ongoing story. Once we have an understanding of these many and varied ways of interpreting the Bible, we can start to grapple with the bigger question. Why do Christians disagree about what the Bible means, and how does that happen? We're going to look at that next time. If you found this video useful, don't forget to like and subscribe.